Jackson Montgomery stood behind the weathered oak bar of the rustic pine, methodically polishing a glass while watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the windows, casting long shadows across the exposed brick walls. His gaze drifted to Isabel's latest painting, a striking piece featuring intertwined hands reaching toward a blood-red sunset. The artwork had become the talking point of his establishment, drawing in a more sophisticated crowd than the usual regulars who'd frequented his bar for the past decade. 2 years ago, when Isabel first walked into his bar with her portfolio tucked under her arm, looking for wall space to showcase her work, he never imagined how completely she would transform his life. She had this way of seeing beauty in the mundane, turning his modest neighborhood bar into an unexpected art destination in downtown Portland. More importantly, she had a way of making him feel like more than just another small business owner trying to keep his head above water. "Another masterpiece," Carter remarked, settling onto his usual barstool. Jackson's oldest friend had a keen eye for bullshit, which made his appreciation for Isabel's work all the more meaningful. "She's really put you on the map, hasn't she?" Jackson nodded, a hint of pride mixing with an undercurrent of unease he couldn't quite place. "She's talented. Always has been." He hesitated, then added, "Been working late a lot lately though. Says she's got this big project she's collaborating on." Carter's expression shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. "With that photographer friend of hers? Nate something?" The name sent an unexpected chill down Jackson's spine. Nate Davidson had appeared in their lives 3 months ago, all expensive camera equipment and carefully cultivated stubble. He called himself a visual storyteller, and seemed to show up at every gallery opening and art event Isabel attended. "Yeah," Jackson replied, his jaw tightening. "They're working on some kind of mixed media series. At least that's what she tells me." "You don't sound convinced," Carter observed, accepting the whiskey Jackson placed before him. Jackson leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the near-empty bar. "Something's off, Carter. She's different lately. Distracted. Last night she didn't come home until 3 in the morning. Said they lost track of time in the studio, but her clothes." He trailed off, the memory of paint-free clothing nagging at him. "Have you talked to her about it?" "Every time I try, she gets defensive. Says I don't understand the creative process, that sometimes inspiration strikes at odd hours." Jackson ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Maybe I'm just paranoid. She's got her first major gallery show coming up next month. Could be stress." The door chimed, and both men turned to see Isabel herself sweep in, her dark hair windswept, cheeks flushed. She moved with the graceful confidence of someone who knew they commanded attention. Behind her, like a shadow, came Nate, his camera hanging around his neck like an expensive medallion. "Jackson, baby." Isabel called out, making her way to the bar. She leaned across it to kiss him, and Jackson caught the unfamiliar scent of sandalwood on her skin. "You won't believe what happened today. The curator from the Portland Modern wants to feature my entire series." "That's amazing," Jackson managed, watching as Nate positioned himself just slightly too close to Isabel. "Both of your work, I assume?" "Well," Nate interjected smoothly, "Isabel's the real star. I just helped capture her vision." His hand brushed her shoulder in what could have been an innocent gesture of support, but something in his eyes when he looked at Jackson spoke of challenge rather than friendship. Isabel didn't seem to notice the tension crackling through the air. "We need to celebrate. Carter, you'll join us, won't you? Nate knows this amazing little wine bar just opened in the Pearl District." "Actually," Jackson cut in, "I thought maybe we could celebrate just us tonight, babe. It's been a while since we had dinner together." Isabel's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, honey, I can't tonight. Nate and I need to finish preparing the preliminary showcase pieces. The curator wants to see them first thing tomorrow morning. Rain check." Before Jackson could respond, she was already turning away, Nate's hand now resting on the small of her back as they headed toward the door. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder. Creative inspiration waits for no one. The door closed behind them with a finality that seemed to echo through the bar. Carter cleared his throat. Jackson. Don't, Jackson warned, his knuckles white around the glass he was still holding. Just, don't. But as the evening wore on and Isabel's latest painting seemed to mock him from the wall, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that his paradise was rapidly unraveling. The intertwined hands in the painting no longer looked like a symbol of connection, they looked like they were drowning in that blood-red sunset, desperately grasping at something already lost. When his phone buzzed with a text from Isabel at midnight, "Working late again, see you tomorrow." Red heart, Jackson made a decision. Tomorrow night, he would follow her. He needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed everything they'd built together. Carter watched his friend's face harden with resolve and silently signaled for another drink. Tomorrow would either bring relief or devastation, and either way, Jackson would need someone in his corner when the truth finally came to light. The autumn rain fell in a fine mist as Jackson parked his truck a block away from Isabel's studio. The weathered brick building housed several artist spaces, but tonight, only one window glowed with warm light. His hands trembled slightly as he killed the engine, the weight of what he might discover pressing against his chest like a stone. Carter's words from earlier that evening echoed in his mind, "Are you sure you want to know? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." But Jackson knew he'd passed the point of no return. The not knowing had become a cancer, eating away at his peace of mind, poisoning every moment they spent together. The security door was propped open with a paint can, typical of the building's bohemian inhabitants. Jackson's footsteps echoed in the empty stairwell as he climbed to the third floor. Music drifted down the corridor, not the classical compositions Isabel usually painted to, but something modern, intimate. As he approached her studio, he heard laughter, her laughter, followed by a deep male voice. Jackson's heart hammered against his ribs as he edged closer to the partially open door. The music grew louder, masking his presence. Through the gap, he could see canvases scattered around the space, some blank, others covered with half-finished works. Wine bottles littered a makeshift table, and in the center of the room. His world stopped. Isabel and Nate were wrapped around each other, their bodies moving in a slow dance that was far too intimate for colleagues. Her head rested on his shoulder, her eyes closed in contentment as his hands traced patterns on her back. As Jackson watched, frozen in place, Nate tilted Isabel's chin up and kissed her with the familiarity of a longtime lover. "We should tell him," Nate murmured against her lips. "This sneaking around, it's not fair to anyone." Isabel sighed, her fingers playing with the buttons of Nate's shirt. "I know. I care about him, Nate. He's been so good to me, given me a platform for my work. The timing needs to be right." "The timing will never be right for breaking someone's heart," Nate replied. "But the longer we wait." "I love you both," Isabel whispered. "Is that so wrong? Jackson gives me stability, security. You understand my soul, my art. Why can't I have both?" The words hit Jackson like physical blows. Each syllable stripped away another layer of the life he thought they'd built together. His hand found the door handle, and before he could stop himself, he shoved it open with enough force to make it slam against the wall. Isabel and Nate sprang apart, but the guilt on their faces told Jackson everything he needed to know. The room spun slightly as rage and grief warred for dominance in his chest. "Jackson." Isabel's voice was high, panicked. "This isn't. I can explain." "Explain?" The word came out as a harsh laugh. "Explain how you've been lying to me. Using me. Making me look like a fool while you carried on with him." "It's not like that," she pleaded, stepping toward him. "I meant what I said, I do love you. What Nate and I have, it's different. It's about art, about creation." "Creation?" Jackson's gaze swept the studio, taking in the empty wine bottles, the rumpled clothing, the unmistakable intimacy of the scene he'd interrupted. Is that what you call this? Art? Nate stepped forward, his expression maddeningly calm. Look, man, we never meant for this to happen. Sometimes emotions are more complex than simple black and white. Jackson's fist connected with Nate's jaw before he even realized he'd moved. The photographer stumbled backward, knocking over an easel. Paint tubes scattered across the floor like dropped jewels. Jackson, stop. Isabel grabbed his arm. Please, let's talk about this like adults. He turned to her, and the sight of tears in her eyes only fueled his anger. Like adults? Was it adult behavior to string me along while you screwed him? To use my bar, my support, my love, while you built your precious artistic connection? You don't understand, she sobbed. The art world, it's complicated. Connections matter. Nate can help my career in ways. In ways I couldn't, Jackson finished flatly. Because I'm just a bar owner. Not sophisticated enough for your world, right? Well, congratulations. You've both created quite a masterpiece here, a perfect study in betrayal. He strode to the wall where several of her finished pieces hung, works she'd been preparing for the upcoming gallery show. With deliberate care, he began taking them down, one by one. What are you doing? Isabel's voice rose in panic. Jackson, those are worth thousands. Not to me, he replied, his voice deadly quiet. To me, they're just beautiful lies. He gathered the canvases in his arms. I want every piece of your work out of my bar by tomorrow noon. After that, they go in the dumpster. You can't do that. Nate protested, holding a hand to his bruising jaw. Those paintings are her property. Jackson turned to him with a smile that held no warmth. Then I suggest you help her move them. But if I see either of you in my bar after tomorrow, I'm calling the police for trespassing. He headed for the door, then paused. Without turning around, he added, you know what the funny thing is, Isabel? I would have given you anything. My love, my trust, my whole world, it was all yours. But it wasn't enough, was it? Nothing ever is for people like you. The sound of Isabel's sobs followed him down the hallway, but he didn't look back. The rain had intensified when he emerged from the building, soaking through his clothes in seconds. He welcomed it, hoping it might wash away the image of them together, might numb the devastating pain in his chest. His phone buzzed, Carter checking in. Jackson stared at the screen through rain-blurred eyes, then typed out a simple message, you were right. It's over. Meet me at the bar. The response came immediately, on my way. Don't do anything stupid before I get there. Jackson got into his truck, the stack of paintings laid across the back seat like fallen soldiers. As he drove through the rain-slick streets, he caught glimpses of them in his rearview mirror, beautiful works of art that now felt like monuments to his own blindness. Tomorrow, he would have to face the wreckage of his life, figure out how to move forward. But tonight he would let himself break apart, let the pain and rage run their course. Because tomorrow was another story, and he'd be damned if he'd let Isabel write its ending. The morning after the confrontation, Jackson stood in the empty bar, staring at the blank spaces on the walls where Isabel's paintings had hung. The absence felt like missing teeth, raw, tender spots his tongue couldn't help but probe. Carter had helped him take them all down the night before, working in silence as Jackson methodically stripped away every trace of her presence. You don't have to open today, Carter had suggested, concern etching deep lines around his eyes. Give yourself some time. But Jackson knew that time alone was dangerous. The bar had been his father's legacy, passed down with calloused hands and quiet pride. Show up every day, the old man used to say. That's half the battle in life, just showing up. So he showed up. He cleaned glasses that were already clean. Wiped down surfaces that gleamed. Pretended not to notice when regular customers glanced at the bare walls, their questions hanging unspoken in the air. He moved through the motions of normalcy like an actor in a play, remembering his cues but feeling none of the emotion. Until she walked in. Isabel stood in the doorway, her artist's portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her usual confident posture replaced by something more tentative. "Jackson," she said softly. "Can we talk?" He continued wiping the bar, his movements mechanical. "Nothing to talk about. Please." She took a step forward. "What you saw, it's complicated. Nate and I, we never meant to." "To what?" Jackson's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge sharp enough to draw blood. "To lie. To make a fool of me. To use my bar, my support, my—" He stopped, steadying himself. "What exactly didn't you mean to do, Isabel?" She set her portfolio on a nearby table, her hands trembling slightly. "I meant everything I said about loving you. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You believed in my work, helped me build my reputation. What I feel for you is real." "Real?" Jackson finally looked at her, really looked at her. The woman he'd loved, who he'd imagined building a future with, suddenly seemed like a stranger. "Was it real when you were lying about working late? When you were with him in your studio, laughing about the fool who was waiting at home?" "We never laughed about you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Nate, he understands my artistic vision in a way that I never could." Jackson's laugh was hollow. "Because I'm just a simple bar owner, right? Not sophisticated enough to understand your artistic vision." "That's not fair," she protested. "You're twisting my words." "No, Isabel. You twisted everything else, my trust, my love, my support. The words are the only honest thing left between us." She took another step forward, close enough now that he could smell her familiar perfume. The scent sent a wave of nausea through him. "I came to apologize," she said. "And to tell you that Nate and I, we're going to wait. I want to try to fix things with you. We could go to counseling, work through this." Jackson stared at her, realization dawning like a cold sunrise. "You lost the gallery show, didn't you?" The slight flinch in her expression told him everything. "The curator, she had concerns about the direction of the work. Nate and I decided it would be better to take some time, refocus. Get out." The words came out tired rather than angry. "Jackson, please." "I said get out." He turned his back to her, unable to bear the sight of her tears, knowing they were for herself rather than for what she'd destroyed. "Your paintings are in the storage room. Take them and go." He heard her move toward the back, heard the sound of canvases being gathered. When she returned, struggling with the awkward load, he didn't offer to help. "You know," she said from the doorway, "one day you'll understand that love isn't simple. It's not black and white. Sometimes we can love more than one person, in different ways." "No." Jackson finally met her gaze. "Love is actually very simple, Isabel. It's either true or it isn't. And what you feel, for me, for him, for anyone, that isn't love. It's just another performance piece in your gallery of self-interest." After she left, the silence in the bar felt oppressive. Jackson pulled out his phone, staring at the dozens of photos he hadn't yet deleted. Happy moments captured in pixels, lies preserved in digital amber. His finger hovered over the delete button when a text from Carter appeared, checking in. "Need anything?" Jackson looked around his bar, his father's bar, where he'd built his life, his dreams, his plans for the future. The walls were bare now, stripped of false beauty, waiting for something real to fill them again. He typed back, "Yeah. Need you to help me reimagine this place. Time for a change." "On my way," came the immediate response. "And Jackson? You're stronger than you think." Looking at the empty walls, Jackson wasn't sure he believed that yet. But as he began making lists of renovations, of new ideas, of ways to reclaim his space, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't healing, not yet. But it was movement. And movement, his father always said, was life's way of pushing you toward something better. His phone buzzed again, Isabel, her name on the screen making his heart clench. Without reading the message, he blocked her number. Then, after a moment's consideration, he did something he'd been avoiding, he opened his banking app. What he saw there made his blood run cold. The joint business account they'd opened for the bar's art sales was empty. Every penny of the proceeds from her paintings she'd sold through his venue, had been transferred out the night before. To an account he didn't recognize. Jackson set the phone down with trembling hands, a different kind of numbness settling over him. This betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. Now it was financial. Professional. And as he stared at the zeros in the account balance, something inside him hardened into resolve. They wanted to play with art. Fine. He would show them a masterpiece in consequences they'd never forget. In the soft glow of his office lamp, Jackson spread the financial documents across his desk like pieces of a painful puzzle. Each bank statement, each transaction record told a story, not just of money stolen, but of trust systematically dismantled. The deeper he dug, the more he discovered how methodically Isabel had orchestrated everything. "You need to see this," he told Carter, pushing a stack of papers across the desk. His friend had become a constant presence these past few weeks, showing up each evening with takeout and quiet support. She didn't just empty the art account. She'd been siphoning money for months, small amounts at first, then larger transfers. Carter studied the documents, his expression darkening. Through the gallery connections. Through shell companies. Jackson pulled up an email on his laptop. "Look at these invoices." Every major piece she sold through the bar was actually purchased by companies I'd never heard of. Companies that, it turns out, Nate helped set up. Jesus, Carter breathed. This wasn't just an affair. This was a long con, Jackson finished, his voice hollow. They used my bar's reputation to legitimize her work, inflated the prices through fake purchases, created a false market value. And he pressed his palms against his eyes. I was so blind, Carter. So goddamn blind. Carter set the papers down carefully. You were in love. Love makes us vulnerable. Love makes us stupid, Jackson corrected, but there was more weariness than bitterness in his tone. The rage that had sustained him through the first weeks had burned down to something cooler, more focused. You know what the worst part is? I keep thinking about all the young artists who approached me about showing their work here. Real talent, honest people just looking for a chance. But I turned them down because Isabel said we needed to maintain exclusivity. To protect her brand. He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the bar's small courtyard. The space where they'd once talked about hosting outdoor exhibitions now seemed like a monument to lost possibilities. I let her use this place, my father's legacy, as a front for her schemes. And now you're going to fix it, Carter said firmly. The question is, how do you want to do that? Jackson turned back to his friend, something shifting in his expression. I got a call today. From Marcus Chen at the Portland Arts Review. Carter straightened in his chair. The critic? The one who specializes in art world exposés? The same. Jackson picked up a notebook filled with his meticulous documentation. He's been investigating a series of suspicious art sales in the Pacific Northwest. Pattern of price inflation, fake buyers, the whole scheme. When he heard about what happened here. Jackson, Carter's voice held a note of concern. Are you sure you want to go public with this? It could affect the bar's reputation. The bar's reputation needs to be rebuilt on truth, Jackson said quietly. My father used to say that integrity isn't just about being honest, it's about standing up when you see dishonesty. All those young artists Isabel pushed out, they deserved better. The whole community deserved better. He sat back down, opening his laptop. Marcus is coming tomorrow. I'm going to show him everything, the financial records, the shell companies, the pattern of deception. But more than that, I'm going to tell him about the real cost of what they did. Not just to me, but to every honest artist who couldn't get wall space because Isabel had created this artificial scarcity. Carter watched his friend carefully. You know they'll try to spin this. Isabel's got connections in the art world. They might try to paint you as a jealous ex, trying to destroy her career. Let them try. Jackson's voice was steady. The truth doesn't need spin. It just needs to be told. As if on cue, his phone lit up with a text. Unknown number, but he recognized Isabel's writing style immediately. We need to talk. Nate and I are willing to make this right. Name your price. Jackson showed the message to Carter, a sad smile playing at his lips. See? They still think everything has a price. That's the difference between us. They see art as a commodity to be manipulated. I see it as my father saw it, a way to bring truth and beauty into the world. He typed out a simple response, the truth isn't for sale. Then he blocked the number. Carter stood, squeezing his friend's shoulder. You know this won't be easy. Once the story breaks. Nothing about this has been easy, Jackson replied. But for the first time since that night in her studio, I feel clean. Like I'm finally doing what's right, not just for me, but for everyone they've hurt with their games. After Carter left, Jackson stayed in his office, organizing his documentation for tomorrow's meeting. On his desk sat a small frame, the only piece of art he hadn't taken down. It was a sketch his father had made of the bar in its early days, rough but honest, full of love for the simple beauty of the place. As he worked through the night, preparing to expose the elaborate fraud that had nearly destroyed everything he'd built, Jackson felt his father's presence stronger than ever. The old man had always said that the measure of a person isn't in how they fall, but in how they choose to rise again. Tomorrow, he would rise. And this time, the art on his walls would tell a true story. His phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Nate, this time, you're making a mistake. We can all benefit from this if you're smart. Don't throw away everything we built. Jackson didn't bother blocking this number. Instead, he saved it, along with the message. More evidence for tomorrow's meeting. More proof of who they really were. Because sometimes, he was learning, the most powerful art isn't what hangs on walls, it's the truth, finally set free. The morning Marcus Chen's article broke in the Portland Arts Review. Jackson opened the bar early. Not for customers, he needed the familiar rhythm of his morning routine to anchor him as his world shifted once again. The gentle hum of the coffee maker, the soft clink of glasses being arranged, the scent of lemon cleaning solution, these small constants felt like lifelines in the storm he knew was coming. Carter arrived just as Jackson finished wiping down the last table, a copy of the Arts Review tucked under his arm. Neither man spoke as Carter laid it on the bar. The headline seemed to pulse with its own energy, the canvas of deception, how Portland's art scene became a money laundering paradise. You don't have to read it now, Carter said quietly. Jackson's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the magazine. Yes, I do. The article was comprehensive, devastating in its methodical exposure of Isabel and Nate's scheme. Marcus had done his research well, tracking the pattern of fraudulent sales across multiple galleries, connecting the dots between shell companies and inflated valuations. Jackson's story was just one thread in a larger tapestry of deception, but it was the human heart of the piece. The true art of the scheme, Jackson read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface, wasn't in the paintings themselves, but in the manipulation of trust. Jackson Montgomery's bar, the Rustic Pine, became not just a venue but a symbol of authenticity that the perpetrators exploited. His belief in supporting local artists was weaponized against both him and the community he sought to serve. Carter watched his friend carefully. You okay? Jackson set the magazine down, turning to face the empty walls of his bar. You know what's strange? Reading it all laid out like that, the shell companies, the fake buyers, the whole elaborate fraud, I should feel worse. More humiliated. But instead, I feel free. Carter suggested. Lighter, Jackson corrected. Like I've been carrying this weight of shame, thinking I should have seen it coming, should have been smarter. But seeing the whole picture, this wasn't just about me. It was never just about me. His phone began buzzing with notifications, first a trickle, then a flood. News outlets wanting comments. Local artists expressing support. Even a few old customers who drifted away during Isabel's exclusive period, saying they'd love to return to the old rustic pine they'd known and loved. Then came the other messages. Isabel's sister, calling him a vindictive liar. Nate's lawyer, threatening defamation suits. Art world contacts warning him he'd never be taken seriously in their circles again. Jackson let them all go to voicemail. Instead, he pulled out a stack of portfolios from behind the bar, submissions from local artists he'd been reviewing all week. Help me with these, he asked Carter. I want to start fresh. Real art. Real artists. No more games. They spread the portfolios across several tables, examining each submission carefully. There was raw talent here, recent art school graduates, self-taught painters, photographers who captured the city's soul rather than its surface. None of them had Isabel's polished presentation or Nate's calculated charm. But their work spoke of authenticity, of passion unencumbered by artifice. This one, Jackson said, pausing over a series of watercolors. The artist works as a night nurse. Paints what she sees in the quiet moments between emergencies. Look at how she captures the hope in those dark hours. Carter smiled, recognizing the spark in his friend's eyes, not the desperate enthusiasm he'd shown with Isabel's work, but something calmer, more genuine. You're really doing this, aren't you? Starting over completely. Not completely. Jackson gestured around the bar. The bones of this place, what my father built, that stays. But it's time to honor his vision properly. He always said art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Isabel's work, it just comforted the comfortable, made them feel sophisticated without challenging anything real. The door chimed, and both men tensed. But it was Marcus Chen, looking somewhat apologetic for arriving unannounced. I thought you might want to know, he said without preamble, the FBI's Art Crimes Division is very interested in the documentation you provided. This goes way beyond Portland. Jackson nodded, unsurprised. I'm guessing Isabel and Nate have already left town. Flew to Europe last night, Marcus confirmed. But they can't run forever. Your evidence, it's going to help a lot of people get justice. Justice isn't what I was looking for, Jackson admitted. I just needed the truth to come out. For myself, for the artists they pushed aside, for everyone who believed their lies. Marcus glanced at the portfolios spread across the tables. Planning a comeback? No, Jackson said firmly. Planning a fresh start. The Rustic Pine was never meant to be an exclusive gallery. It's a neighborhood bar that celebrates local artists. Real ones. That's what we're going back to. After Marcus left, Carter helped Jackson begin sorting the portfolios into potential exhibitions. They worked in comfortable silence until Carter spoke up. You know what just occurred to me? In all their elaborate schemes, Isabel and Nate forgot the most basic truth about art. What's that? It's not about the price tag or the prestige. It's about making people feel something real. Jackson picked up another portfolio, photographs of Portland's homeless community, taken by a former homeless man who now worked as a shelter counselor. Each image radiated dignity, humanity, and hope. Yeah, he said softly. And sometimes the most valuable art comes from the people who never thought their vision was worth sharing. His phone buzzed one last time, an unknown European number. Jackson didn't need to read the message to know it was Isabel, making one last attempt to justify, to manipulate, to twist the truth into another pretty lie. He deleted it unread. There was real work to be done, real artists to support, real beauty to share with the world. And for the first time since that rainy night outside Isabel's studio, Jackson felt truly, completely, himself again. 6 months after the Portland Arts Review article, Jackson stood in the center of the rustic pine, watching the late afternoon sunlight filter through the newly installed skylights. The warm glow illuminated walls that now told a different story, one of authenticity, resilience, and community. Where Isabel's calculated pieces had once hung, a diverse tapestry of local artwork breathed new life into the space. Sarah Martinez's series of watercolors captured quiet moments in the emergency room where she worked night shifts. Tom Chen's photographs documented the dignity of Portland's homeless community. Maria Wilson's abstract sculptures, crafted from reclaimed materials, spoke of transformation and renewal. Each piece carried not just artistic merit, but the weight of real human experience. "You've really done something special here," Carter said, joining him at the bar. "Look at this crowd." The space was indeed filling up for the evening's event, the bar's first quarterly New Voices in Art showcase. Artists mingled with patrons, their conversations carrying the authentic buzz of genuine engagement rather than the affected sophistication that had characterized Isabel's gatherings. "Dad would have loved this," Jackson replied softly, running his hand along the weathered oak bar. "He always said art should tell the truth, even when the truth isn't pretty." The truth hadn't been pretty these past months. The FBI investigation into Isabel and Nate's scheme had uncovered a network of fraud that spanned multiple cities. The art world had been rocked by revelations of money laundering and price manipulation. But from those ashes, something authentic had emerged. "Mr. Montgomery." A young woman approached the bar, her hands nervously clutching a portfolio. "I'm Emily Chen, Tom's sister. He said I should show you my work." Jackson smiled, gesturing to an empty spot at the bar. "Please, call me Jackson. Tell me about your art." As Emily spread out her sketches, raw, powerful drawings of life in Portland's Chinese-American community, Jackson felt the familiar spark of recognition. Not the seductive pull of Isabel's calculated beauty, but the honest resonance of truth captured on paper. The door chimed, and Jackson looked up to see Marcus Chen enter, accompanied by a distinguished-looking woman he recognized as the director of the Portland Museum of Modern Art. They'd been instrumental in helping him rebuild the rustic pine's reputation, focusing on emerging artists and community engagement. "Jackson," Marcus called out, making his way through the crowd. "You need to see this." He handed over a tablet displaying a news article from an Italian art blog. The headline, even in Italian, made Jackson's heart skip: "Scandal-plagued artists face charges in international fraud case." The accompanying photo showed Isabel and Nate being escorted by authorities in Milan. They looked smaller somehow, stripped of their carefully cultivated glamour. Isabel's face, captured in an unguarded moment, showed something Jackson had never seen before: fear. "They're being extradited next week," Marcus explained quietly. "The FBI wants to talk to you again, get your testimony for the trial." Jackson handed back the tablet, surprised by the calm he felt. "They can call my lawyer. I've said everything I need to say." "You're not curious about what happens to them?" Jackson gestured around the bar, at Emily's honest sketches, at the diverse crowd engaged in genuine conversation about art, at the community that had grown from the ashes of betrayal. "What happens to them isn't my story anymore. This is." Later that night, after the successful showcase had wound down and the last guests had left, Jackson sat in his office doing the evening's accounts. The bar's finances were simpler now, more transparent. No shell companies, no inflated art sales, just honest transactions between artists and art lovers. He opened his desk drawer, pulling out the small sketch his father had made of the bar in its early days. Next to it, he placed a new addition, a photograph taken earlier that evening of the crowded bar, walls lined with local art, people engaged in animated discussion. Old vision, new reality. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown international number. For a moment, his finger hovered over the delete button. But instead, he opened the message. Jackson, I saw the news about your gallery showcase. The bar looks different. Better. I should have understood what you were trying to build there. What your father built. I'm sorry. Not just for the money, but for making you doubt your own worth. You deserved better. He read it twice, feeling the words settle into place like the final pieces of a long unsolved puzzle. Then he typed out a simple reply, thank you. I hope you find your truth someday. After sending it, he blocked the number, not out of anger this time, but because some chapters need to stay closed for new ones to begin. Carter's words from months ago echoed in his mind, the measure of a person isn't in how they fall, but in how they choose to rise. The rustic pine had risen, transformed not by expensive art or calculated schemes, but by the simple power of authentic expression. Jackson stood, taking one last look around his father's bar, now truly his own. Tomorrow would bring new artists, new stories, new challenges. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was ready for whatever came next. Because he had finally learned the most valuable lesson of all, true art, like true healing, comes not from what we pretend to be, but from who we really are.